I would like to bring on stage our energy storage experts. I know we're running over time, but we still see that we have a constant interest of audience, which is fantastic. I would like to bring on stage and introduce to you Mikhail Nikomarov. With over 15 years of international business experience in energy and finance, including being a CEO and co-founder of Bushveld Energy since 2015, with 7 years experience with McKinsey and Company in Moscow and Johannesburg, advising national governments, utilities, and manufacturers on growth strategy and policy, and leading operational turnarounds in the energy sector. Then 3 years as a portfolio managers is in Sovereign Bank and US, now Standard Bank, and chairman of the board, South African Energy Storage Association. So Mikhail, you have achieved and done a lot for young gentlemen as you are. So without further kind of delays, because I know that we're a bit over time, I'm absolutely thrilled to invite you on stage because you're the only expert who will be talking about energy storage. So we have quite a stable audience here, very curious to actually hear what you have to say. So welcome, Mikhail.
Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm going to share my PowerPoint presentation rather than the PDF. So indeed, I will talk about energy storage. Thank you very much for that introduction. So I actually don't really need to go into this page about me. I might just mention the company that I run, Bushveld Energy. We focus on a technology that's used in long duration storage, which is vanadium redox flow battery technology. I won't go into a lot of detail on that, but we are part of a larger group, Bushveld Minerals, listed in London, which is a vanadium company. And basically on the energy side, we look at everything that that can use the vanadium molecule in stationary storage. But as Oksana mentioned, I think I can bring quite a broad lens and perspective here. I chair the South Africa Energy Storage Association, and I also chair the Energy Storage Committee within Vanitec, which is a non-for-profit global association of vanadium producers. I think I'm going to cover, in the limited time we have, five very, very rich topics. One is I'll provide an overview of the energy storage market globally. I'll talk about a trend, and then I'll talk about basically three trends. One towards long duration applications, which is something that's very dear to what our company focuses on. A recent spike in investment in M&A into energy storage. Specifically, there's a growing interest in non-lithium storage technologies, which I'll touch on. And then finally, I wanted to point out kind of the role of hydrogen in the energy storage ecosystem as well, because I think that's an emerging topic. So without further ado, let's talk about storage. I think the story of why energy storage is so important actually starts with the energy transition. And I always like to consider that there's actually two key components to the energy transition. The first one is the fact that everything is starting to get electrified. So in 1980, only 10% of all energy went through electricity. Today, it is 20%. By the middle of this century, it'll be 45%. So this trend towards the electrification of everything is a major aspect of the energy transition, which I feel is actually not emphasized enough. The part that we do hear a lot, which is the contribution of renewable energy at the expense of fossil fuels. And you can see that on the right part of the chart, where we're basically going forward, especially, about 2/3 to 75% by the middle of this century of electricity will be generated by renewable energy, solar, wind. Obviously, hydro has been the dominant source of renewable energy generation to date, and then there's some aspects around biomass and geothermal as well. So when you take these two factors together, they actually all increase the need for storage. And it all comes back to the fact that electricity itself is very difficult to store as electricity. So you need to convert it into another type of energy. And that's what we mean by energy storage. It's the ability to take energy produced at one time of the day or at one point in time and store it to be used at another point in time. So I always like to compare it to transmission infrastructure, which is a spatial, take electricity that is produced at one point, geographically and then transmitted to another point geographically. Energy storage is the same thing, only in terms of time. And so that's quite important as we think about why it's growing. So traditionally, energy storage, especially grid-supported energy storage, has really been provided by pumped hydro. I think a lot of the media today focuses on batteries, especially batteries that are used in electric vehicles and how that can be used to support power systems or renewable energy. But really, most storage to date has been pumped hydro. This is the US market, where you can see about 91% is pumped hydro in terms of power. If you actually did this in megawatt hours, that 91% would probably spike to about 96, 97%. But there are other technologies. Batteries are definitely emerging. We've also seen some thermal storage, but to date, it's really been pumped hydro. Unfortunately, pumped hydro is very difficult to deploy nowadays. In some regions, there's just no space, and I think the Middle East is one of those where water is scarce. The topography may not support pumped hydro type of schemes. And also, even in other regions, it's becoming a challenge due to environmental requirements. And also, you need to build large facilities for pumped hydro. That's not really flexible. So there are a lot of technologies on the market beyond pumped hydro that are either in advanced deployment or some that are emerging. But they differ. They differ based upon how large and how scalable they can be. They differ based upon, are they better fit for short duration, so a few minutes of storage, maybe an hour or two, or is it longer duration, so 4 hours, 6 hours, 10 hours, or possibly even seasonal storage. You can also see there are differences in round trip efficiency. Hydrogen, for example, when it's used in energy, has really low round trip efficiency. So for every electron you get, or every watt you get out, you're basically losing 2, or you can calculate that in joules. But other technologies have higher efficiencies. Batteries are usually, around 90%. Maybe flow batteries are a little bit less than that. And those are just differences. Mechanical storage is quite popular as well, not really deployed a lot, but emerging. Compressed air, gravity storage, things like that. So there are different technologies. Also, how long they last. How many times can you actually cycle, charge and discharge them? That's another way to also think about the different technologies. Overall, the sector is growing massively. This is a cumulative installations from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. You can see it's kind of got exponential growth. Certainly China and the US are the 2 largest markets. So it's good to look at those to see where things would be going. I actually think that Africa is underrepresented here. There's going to be a lot of installations even in the first half of this decade. So in terms of storage, where are the needs? And actually 90% of the applications are long duration. So at least 4 hours of daily storage and up. The definition of long duration does vary, but it's never less than 4 hours. And you can see that most of the applications are around generation capacity and how storage supports that, but also how storage can support transmission distribution. So it's also a wire solution. It's not only about helping renewable energy, but it's also about making the power system much more efficient and actually reducing the need to increase your transmission lines, and your distribution networks. So long duration is basically the big chunk of growth. It's not the only use case, but it is about 90%. Here's an example from the US markets. There's a lot of different markets in the US, which you can see on the x-axis. And in blue, 4-hour duration applications. In orange are 6-hour, and in green are 8-hour. And you can see that while things differ system by system, there's a lot of 6 and 8-hour applications. They actually are more than 4-hour duration. So even in the US, the need for long duration is quite large. And this is true of other geographies, although sometimes the studies aren't as advanced there. Also looking at the US market, which really started off as being a short duration market, where you basically just use storage to bid frequency control. And so you had a lot of short duration systems. You can see in 2015, the average energy storage project in the US, was about 43 minutes, right? Today, it is almost 2.5 hours on average, which means there are still some shorter duration systems that are coming online, but it means a lot more 4-hour systems. And increasingly, we'll probably see more 6, 8 hour, and possibly even multi-day storage as well. So that's a clear trend, and it's something to think about that in terms of its relevance, not only just to the US, but globally as well. Markets like South Africa and China, for example, start with much longer duration to start off, because they actually have different use cases, which are immediately more tied to supporting the grid and integrating renewable energy. Another trend that I wanted to mention is the amount of investment that is actually now going into manufacturing and battery companies themselves. About 3 years ago, it was impossible to raise capital if you were a battery company, regardless of what technology you were using. Lithium, flow batteries, thermal storage, you couldn't raise money. However, the last 2 years, and maybe this kind of started a little bit in 2019 and slowed a little bit at the pandemic, all of a sudden capitals started to flow into this sector, and it's basically shut up. And yeah, I think part of that is a bit of a pendulum. Some companies that struggled in 2016, 2017, investors are starting to forget about that. But part of that is, this realization that the energy transition is definitely happening, and that if anything, it is accelerating in a post-COVID environment. As we've seen decreases in the costs of solar, especially, and wind as well, but also the cost of storage technologies themselves. So there's a lot of capital flowing into these. If we did this through the third quarter, the same trend. But it's a massive increase in terms of the number of capital that's going into manufacturing and the companies themselves. And what I want to stress is it's actually not only lithium. So of those deals that I pointed out, of the 5 largest, 2 were for non-lithium companies. And this entire list here on this page is actually companies that do not use lithium-ion technology, but are still attracting hundreds of millions of dollars, and in some cases reaching valuations in excess of $1 billion. ESS is a flow battery company that uses iron. They don't have any revenues, and yet they right now have a market cap of $2 billion. Now, one can decide whether that's over exuberance, whether it's a Tesla effect, or whether it's the fact that as Wood Mackenzie pointed out, as we move into the next phase of the energy transition, 4 hours, which is probably where lithium ceases to kind of make sense competitively, it just will not cut it anymore. And that's why all of these investors, and again, I'm quoting Wood Mackenzie here, are asking if there's a long duration technology that scales better than lithium ion. A flow battery, for example, can scale power and energy separately, whereas a lithium-ion battery, very similar to our alkaline, AA, AAA batteries that we have, that we kind of used to when we were growing up, those scale at the same level. So power and energy are tied together. In a lot of these technologies, the energy, the watt hours can be scaled independently of the watt. Think of it like a car, where you've got the motor and you've got the gas tank. Right? The motor actually tells you how fast you can go, how much torque a truck can generate, how much power the car can produce. But it's the gas tank that determines how far the car can go. So it doesn't help you to have a very large motor if your goal is to travel 400 or 500 kilometers. You need a larger gas tank for that. And so that's where these technologies come in. And they're different. There's a couple of vanadium battery companies out here. There's cryogenic thermal storage. There are a couple of zinc metal air batteries, zinc and iron. There's crane gravity storage as well. So that just shows how much interest there is, and how successful these companies are in kind of, I think, capitalizing on what is definitely a trend and what is definitely a need. Will they all be successful? I think that's the answer is probably no. Which ones? Well, this is what investors are keen to find out. So the last thing I'll just touch upon today is what is the role of hydrogen, which is another emerging, I guess, technology and application in the energy space. And what I would just point out on this screen here, this is kind of a bird's eye view of the hydrogen economy, and I think others have talked to it in a lot more extent today. And I won't focus on that. But what I do want to point out is the power system bid, the grid services, are a small piece of what the hydrogen economy is. So hydrogen is not in itself a solution to every, to the electricity that's needed by the power sector. Even the substitute for electric vehicles, with hydrogen fuel cell powered vehicles is still only a piece of what hydrogen could do. And that's the trick here. On its own, using hydrogen for energy storage is extremely inefficient. It's too expensive. It probably doesn't need to be used that often. And its round trip efficiency for energy coming in, energy coming out is way too low. However, if you could somehow use that infrastructure and you could store the hydrogen and determine, well, you know what, a few times a year where, the sun isn't shining or the wind isn't blowing as much, or maybe demand is very different, I want to redeploy some of those hydrogen molecules that may have gone into ammonia, or that may have gone into heat, or may have gone into industry. I think that they're more important to be used for the power sector, because I don't want to put in a whole bunch of batteries that some of which I'll only use 1 or 2 or 3 weeks a year. But with hydrogen, because a lot of that infrastructure can be used for other purposes, the fact that a few weeks a year I'll use it for storage, for energy purposes and power system purposes, well, that makes a lot of sense. And so for me, that's probably the use case that would make the most sense if hydrogen were to factor into our power system. But it is unlikely to be the core use itself. We'd still probably rely much more on energy coming from renewable sources and on storage through other means.